attending. From our friends that are watching at the pond in Emeryville at Leapfrog, thank you for attending. And to our colleagues across the pond in London and other points around the globe, welcome. Thank you so much for attending. We're very excited for our presentation today with Robin. Let me say I'm Scott Traylor. I'm the president of the Children's Media Association for the San Francisco Bay Area. We are a global organization with chapters in New York and Los Angeles, with others to be announced. And I lead efforts with the Bay Area. What is unique about CMA in the Bay, we tend to be a bit more tech forward, much more interested in interactive media research, touch screens, tech toys, and we are very thankful for our members who help support our events in person and online. If you are a member, thank you so much for your support. If you are not a member, please do consider becoming one for other great events, whether here in San Francisco or anywhere around the globe. And if you are a tech forward and not a member, please consider joining the Bay Area chapter. We'd love to have you. With that said, let me hand over the presentation to Robin. Robin is a researcher with a wealth of knowledge in the video game sector and how it relates to children. Robin, we're very excited to have you here. I can't wait to hear your presentation.
Thanks, Scott. I'm excited to be presenting to you all, and shout out to the folks in Emeryville because I'm about 5 minutes away from you. I'm in Berkeley. So let's begin. I'm super excited. So what I'm going to be talking about today is called Through the Looking Glass, and it's a view of kids' entertainment through gaming. Next, please. All right, so just an agenda here, just a brief, I want to give some brief introductions about my company and myself, go through the executive summary, and I'm going to skip the implications until later. I want to really just get into the key findings, and then of course have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so who's Think Tank? So Think Tank, we are a full service research and strategy consultancy. As I mentioned, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area, so a lot of the work that we do actually focuses on specifically media, technology, and video games. And 90% of the work we do is custom research. So things like surveys, focus groups, UX testing, ethnography. We work with a variety of media and tech, and as I've mentioned, video game companies. So my background, so I've got, hard to believe, but I've been 25 plus years in kids and market research in terms of my experience. My video game knowledge is really deep. I've worked on over 100 video game franchises. And my experience in video games came from leading research efforts at Electronic Arts. I did that for 6 years, and then I started Think Tank 15 years ago. This is hard to believe, our 15th year anniversary. And way back when, really the early days of my career, we're studying the impact of technology on children's learning and play. So I was a consultant. I worked for organizations like McGraw-Hill, PBS, the state of California. I spent some time at an educational software company. So children's media is really near and dear to me. It's, you know, where I started my career. And I have two daughters who are 11 and 14. So I've seen from a, as I like to say, a focus group of one perspective, their interaction with media. And in my spare time, which as a working parent who has spare time, but I do enjoy hiking and skiing in the winter. So let's talk a little bit about the executive summary, what I'm going to be talking about today, because it really is through the lens of gaming. And so, as you all probably now know, gaming is the predominant media for Gen Alpha and Gen Z. And what's intriguing about, shall we say, interactive media or video gaming is that it really provides a unique mix of things like problem-solving skills, social skills, creative outlets, in a way that traditional media in the past has not been able to provide. Where I'm coming from in terms of this presentation is sharing the results of a study that we did earlier this year, talking to gamers and specifically gaming parents. And one of the things that I think is so interesting as we go through generationally the changes in media and technology is that gaming parents not only are first gamers, or rather first parents and then gamers, though hopefully there aren't some folks that think about being gamers first, but they really are content gatekeepers. And because gaming in particular for gaming parents is so foremost, it is a major leisure time activity, they're really kid influencers. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking a lot about today is just how media has changed, where you've got what we like to call, the 100-pound gorilla in the room, which is that your kids are spending, a majority of time with video games. It's their favorite thing to do. It's influencing all forms of other type of media, whether it's social media, whether it's television, it's movies. So gaming is really having a huge impact, not only on the entertainment universe, but also on children's media in particular. All right, next slide. We're going to skip the implications, so we'll just kind of go into the findings. All right, so this quote, for those of you who may or may not have kids, really sums it up. I don't have children, but I have nieces that really like Minecraft. I'm not sure why, because it looks like fake Legos to me. And one of the things that I want to speak about is when you're thinking about parents and you're thinking about professionals like ourselves who may be millennials or Gen Xers or baby boomers, is that gaming is a fairly new pastime. And so what I want to do to first sort of ground this conversation is really talk about media, how it's evolved through those generations, starting with Gen X and then ending up with Gen Alpha. So moving forward, let's just get into it. I want to first talk about this media generation gap that we have. So go back to Gen X, next slide. And that's really, I was born in 1968. So I remember watching Sesame Street on a black and white TV in our family room. To shout out to those folks that are in New York that have actually worked with the Children's Television Workshop. But if you think about broadcast TV back then, or you think about the content and really the amazing goal of Sesame Street, which not only was to be educational and to provide, a window into underrepresented youth, it was fairly static. Large screen, so television format, even though probably the largest TV back then was maybe a 19-inch TV in black and white, fairly static. And then also finite distribution. For those of you who are Gen Xers, you remember that there was, the three major networks, PBS, and then a handful of local stations. I tell this to my children and they're like, what? Like TVs used to look like furniture? But I think it's really important to just ground where we came from. So moving forward, what we saw with Gen Y are a couple of really advanced technologies enter the marketplace. So first and foremost, the rise of cable TV. So on the right, you'll see just, Nickelodeon in their heyday, where they were, novel in terms of, presenting a full slate of media that was kid-based. And then also the rise of home VHS and DVD. And I think that's also really important because what we started to see is if you think about gatekeeping, where the parent would have to turn on the TV, and I remember those fond days of it would just be, the Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, and then Zoom lineup, that there's now some freedom entering the equation. Maybe kids don't necessarily know how to pop a DVD into a television. Maybe they're not really sure how to change the channel, but they definitely can start to influence their choice of media. And I think that's really critical when you're thinking about Gen Y or millennials, is that this is where the concept of having choice in media starts to take place. And it's unscheduled. You can pretty much, watch, for example, a Little Mermaid video at any point of the day, if you will. Next, please. So then we're moving into Gen Z. So we're talking about those who were born in the late 90s and early 2000s. Again, some really novel stuff going on here. Nickelodeon, as you know, is probably at their heyday, but also you see the introduction of Netflix. And again, what's happening here is that through the advancements in mobile technology, so iPads, for example, is that content is becoming not only available on the large screen, but it's also on what we call the medium screen. It's still fairly static in that kids don't have a lot of autonomy over it, but there are additional distribution mediums starting here, most notably Netflix in its early days, and it's unscheduled. So again, children are having more autonomy as it relates to the choice of their media. All right, so now Gen Alpha, and I actually have, it's interesting, I have one Gen Z and one Gen Alpha daughter, and this is really the advent of smartphones. And this is really where everything starts to blow up. And we're talking about 15 years ago, because now content is available on large, medium, and small screens. It's dynamic in that you've got gaming on multiple screens. You've got user-generated content through YouTube. You're starting to see the rise of influencers. You've got a variety of new platforms, thinking about all the streaming media platforms, everyone from Disney Plus to Max to Hulu. And it's very unscheduled. And I think this is a real critical point, because not only children don't necessarily have that gatekeeper that they did generations ago turning on the TV, but they have a wide range of choices, whether it's going onto an iPad and engaging in short content, playing a video game on a console and larger content, and so forth. So let's kind of focus a little bit about gaming in particular. And I didn't include a lot of stats around this, but interactive media, video games, is the largest form of entertainment in the world. It's a global industry, and it dwarfs, for example, the movie industry fivefold. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, where is this coming from? And it specifically comes from Gordon Moore, who was the co-founder of Intel. His Moore's Law really was quite intriguing in that it said the number of transistors on a microchip doubles every 2 years. And really what that says is that computing power is getting more and more exponential in growth. And so I remember when I worked in educational technology in the early 90s, there were things that we really, really wanted to do, but we were stuck building for, a Mac 2E. It's just that what we wanted to do, even if we were working with, for example, Macromedia, is that there was a gap in that we wanted to have interactive educational media. And quite frankly, the computing power just wasn't there. So generationally, let's take us back. For those of you who are Stranger Things fans, I couldn't resist putting this in the deck. So where does gaming begin? So it really does begin with Gen X. Gaming is large screen. It's mostly single player. You're going to the arcade, so you're able to put your quarters in. It's interactive. Finite distribution in terms of, if your mom can drop you off at, the pizza place, or maybe there's a video game place at the mall. And obviously, kids are limited to, whether or not they can actually get to said pizza place or mall. And it's clearly, limited in terms of when they can and cannot play. Now, where we start to see a huge shift is in Gen Y and millennials. So this is what I like to call the early console era. And I was doing focus groups last night and was talking to a variety of 20 and 30 somethings. And they're like, oh yeah, I had the original Nintendo NES and my brother and I fought over it because there weren't a lot of games that we could play together. So this is where, you've got you can go back in the day, if you will, the Sega Genesis. You can also think about maybe the early days of the PlayStation 1, where gaming comes home, and it comes home in what we often call 8-bit or 16-bit technology, where you can see it's kind of pixelated, but the graphics are certainly better than we experienced as Gen Xers playing Pong on Atari or, Pac-Man. I think what's also really intriguing about this era is that this is a very nostalgic era for people of millennials. So like my cousin who is 40, he's like, oh, my sister and I saved up so much money so that we could actually get our first console. Gamers in particular have a lot of affinity for this time, and in particular the Nintendo platform, because the Nintendo platform was really king during this era. So moving forward, we're talking about Gen Z, and you're like, who are these pimply-faced folks from South Park? But what's happening here is from the early days of console gaming, consoles are now going online. So the Xbox 360 was the first major console to go online. That was in 2005. Then the PlayStation 3 came on a year later in 2006. I can't even begin to state what a game changer this was for the game industry. Because for the first time, instead of your buddies having to come over and play in your basement, you could actually, just like the South Park characters here, play online, albeit in your basement, with folks from all over the world. And so this is a time where there's a rise of a lot of different types of games as well. MMOs, multiplayer, online games like World of Warcraft. This is where casual games began, where people were playing online games on PCs. It's a very, very robust time, and one that for this audience is really deeply embedded in their hearts as well, because they're able to game with whoever they want to game with. Now, Gen Alpha, which I think is so interesting, and this is just an image that I picked up from the internet. I think that if I count all the screens, I see at least 6. But what's happening here, and this is really our current times, is what we call cross-platform. So gaming is just huge in terms of you're thinking about the screens that you can play on, whether it's large, medium, small, or even with VR. You can play single player, you can play online modes, you can play co-op with people at home, like perhaps these two kids are doing, but it looks like they're actually playing separate games. You can play online with others. You can go and, play Fortnite with your buddies, or after school, you can go onto Roblox and have fun with your friends. This is something also, which I think if you keep going back to gatekeeping, parents are just giving their kids a little bit more range to actually, pick the medium that they want to. And in previous generations, they might have come home and watched Nickelodeon for, a 2-3 hour block until dinner. Now that block of time is actually devoted to gaming, whether it's just gaming in person or gaming with their friends online through platforms like Roblox and Minecraft and more advanced games like Minecraft. So let's talk about screens, because I really want to just give a primer into, how the availability of screens as evidenced in that image is really important. So next slide, please. So what we're seeing, just like the image from that previous slide, is that most homes have multiple screens. So you think about it again generationally. If you were a Gen Xer, maybe you had a TV, in your bedroom. Maybe your parents had a TV in their bedroom. But for the most part, there was one TV. It was the major family viewing TV in the family room, the den, the living room, etc. Now what we're seeing is that not only is that screen much larger, we also may have parents with offices that have multiple screens. They may have a man cave or a she shed with large screens. You're also seeing the rise of online gaming. So a lot of gamers are actually having very complex, expensive, PC gaming machines and large monitors. And then, of course, you've got the proliferation of not only mobile platforms like Android tablets and iPads, but also just the computing power that you're seeing in both the iPhone and Android platforms. So it's not uncommon to not only have multiple screens, but also for homes to have multiple consoles. And this is really, again, a bit of a primer in terms of what the three major consoles are. So obviously there's PlayStation. PlayStation has been around since the late 90s. So this goes back to that golden early era of gaming. You have the ability to purchase games online. It directly competes with Xbox. You've got all different types of games: action, shooter, sports, role-playing. It's also well known for content, developing content. So The Last of Us, which was a video game series that was actually developed into an HBO show, is a Sony exclusive. And, PlayStation and Xbox have been a bit in this arms war for the last 15, 20 years. Some, as we say, generations being like PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. Xbox has named them various things, which I won't bore you with. Is that, one is usually more popular than the other for a variety of factors. Right now, Xbox has really been in the news because they recently acquired Activision Blizzard, who are the makers of Call of Duty, the most popular. It's a $1 billion first-person shooter franchise. They're also known for more complex MMO games like World of Warcraft, Diablo. They also, a lot of people don't realize this, but at the time, obviously it's now owned by Microsoft, but Activision Blizzard also owns King, who is the maker of Candy Crush. So what's happening with the two consoles, the two major consoles that compete head-to-head, PlayStation and Xbox, is they're really known for high graphical fidelity, long-form gaming, that you can do short casual games on online for both PlayStation and Xbox. And they're kind of battling it out for the heart of the gamers. Microsoft also has a subscription service called Game Pass, where you can, pay a monthly subscription fee, and basically it's play all the console games that you want on Xbox. Now, Nintendo, which has been around since the very, very early days of gaming, many people speak fondly about their Nintendo DSs or their N64s, which was a home-based console. They decided about 15 years ago that they weren't going to be in this arms war between PlayStation and Xbox. And so what they decided that they would do is really leverage their IP. And this is so, so critical on so many different ways of looking at the gaming industry, because Nintendo, quite frankly, has the best, not only kids, but I would say family friendly or evergreen content in gaming. So we're talking about major character-based games like Mario or Super Mario or Zelda, and Super Smash Brothers, Pokemon. They've done an amazing job for over 40 years in leveraging these characters and these worlds. And so what they decided to do when they first came out with the Nintendo Wii is to say, hey, we're just not going to be in an arms battle here. We're going to have a lower fidelity console, but it's actually going to be have some motion sensitive controllers so that you can play. And that was really a game changer. And it was a game changer because the combination of having a motion censored controller and having family friendly content meant that Nintendo really became this family friendly, fun activity that parents and kids could actually engage with. And they've continued that theme with the Nintendo Switch, which basically is a slightly smaller, like a small tablet-sized controller that you can play Switch games in a home environment, but you can also take that small tablet controller and play portable. And what's amazing about that is that in some ways you have increased not only the physical reach of the console because it's portable and home-based, but because you're dealing with IP that is really beloved by kids and parents, it's driven a lot of people to purchase the Switch. The other thing I would be remiss in not talking about is a slew, and I could have an entire presentation on this, of additional services that kids are engaging with, whether it's purchasing through Steam, which is a online game service, or Google Play, or the Apple App Store, but also spending a lot of time viewing and learning about video games, whether it's on YouTube, whether they're going to Reddit to learn how to play a particular game, learn cheats, learn how to beat a particular level, and then also online communities like Twitch and Discord, which allow gamers, in Discord's case, to actually talk to one another while playing, and Twitch to really view gamers' streams. And I know that sounds a little strange. Like, people actually like to watch other people playing video games, but that's a huge, huge industry. And there are a lot of kid influencers as well who put out a lot of user-generated content about, how to make it to the next level in this particular game. And it's just a very, very robust ecosystem. I would be remiss if I also didn't mention social media, which is intriguing because TikTok in particular is a social media channel that kids go to have fun, to be engaged with stupid tricks or dances or music or things like that. But in both TikTok and Instagram, kids are also learning about video games. They're seeing clips from video games. It's another way that they actually engage with gaming. And so I think it's really important to recognize, in addition to there being a variety of screens that kids can engage with as it relates to gaming, they also are a variety of platforms and services that are really supplementing this ecosystem. So when we look at gaming parent behavior, and I want to say this is just gaming parent behavior, what you're seeing is that gaming parents are spending also a lot of time on screens playing video games. So for example, half of them say that they're playing video games on a computer weekly, 73% are on a console, weekly, and then 83% are playing on mobile. And what I think is intriguing about, mobile versus computer and console is that because mobile is portable, here, I got my mobile phone right here, is that it facilitates not only a lot of on-the-run gaming for parents, but it also facilitates a lot of gaming for kids. And intriguingly, iOS is preferred. There's been kind of the similar arms war between Android and Apple for the last 15 years as it relates to smartphones. iOS is preferred by gaming parents. iOS is also preferred by younger audiences. Now, why is this important? It's important also because if you think about the number of content services that Apple has been developing, whether it's through Apple TV or through Apple Arcade, which is their subscription-based gaming service, is that Apple is really trying to create through other services as well, whether it's news, whether it's movies, a content ecosystem. And in particular, what we're seeing is that because not only is iOS preferred by parents, but it's preferred by teenagers, is that they're getting, as we say in this business, more eyeballs. So let's talk about pass on, pass back, pass down, and all around. So next slide, please. So what we know is that screen usage begins early, and despite health professionals' warnings, screen time is embraced, even by kids that are under 3 and babies. It's just something for better or for worse is happening. And what we're seeing is something that happened during the first few years of the smartphone generation, which is something called a pass back, where literally, the kid would be crying in, the back seat of the car, and the mom would just pass back the phone and say, okay, why don't you just watch this video? And it's used as a virtual babysitter, again, for better or for worse. And that's really become entrenched. The other thing that we're seeing is that as kids get older, what happens is independent play. And so kids then gravitate to playing independently with their own device. Sometimes it starts where you're at your 5 or 6 and your parents have an old iPhone and it's, maybe it's Wi-Fi connected, maybe it's not. So you're just playing, silly games, maybe it's Temple Run, maybe, it's, Subway Surfers. But that's where this independent play starts. And in many cases, the kids are on a hand-me-down device. So then what happens is that similar to generations of old, where kids would play with siblings on, let's say, their Nintendo N64, is that's going on. But what we found in the pandemic is that online play actually increased because obviously kids couldn't go out. What was their only social outlet? I think this is really, really critical for both girls and boys, but even more for boys because, whether you want to, believe in gender constructs or not, girls tend to be more social than boys. Boys tend to be more competitive. So one of the things that I consistently see in my research is that boys are actually playing games, particularly online shooters, other sorts of competitive games, and that's their one outlet with their friends. They'll be talking on their headsets with their friends, whereas girls are often more likely to, maybe just be texting on a phone or like FaceTiming, for example. But in particular, this is critical for young boys, to the point where people sometimes ask me, like, should my son be playing video games? And I'm like, yeah, because that's in some cases the only social currency that boys have is talking about video games. Well, girls tend to have more, again, I'm talking generally speaking, tend to converse in more particular subjects. And so what you're seeing also is that this gaming increases in that over time as they get older, and this is weekly gameplay. I mean, some of the stats out there say that, 90% of all kids are gaming, but that's often like 90% of all kids are gaming at least every 6 months. So this is true, gaming. This is from our study that we're seeing that, by the time that kids reach, 7, half of them are gaming on a weekly basis. Now, what I think is interesting too is there's a developmental stage that goes on. So as I mentioned before, when they're really little, maybe they're just playing, silly little puzzle games. It might be licensed content. It might be, playing, let's say, a Peppa Pig game, or they might be doing something, educational in nature. Whether it's something like, this is kind of old now, like ABC Mouse, or they're going to, what we used to call back in the day, edutainment. But by the time that they get to grade school, they've gravitated to real gaming content. And I think this is really critical for anyone who's in children's media to recognize that, just like how the window of time that girls play with Barbies has shrunk over time, is that the same thing has happened with children's media. So a lot of time I'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, we want to do, an app for a kid and it's, ages 6 to 12. And I'm like, it's not 6 to 12. It's maybe 6 to 8, because by the time the kids get to 9 and 10, especially boys, they've already gravitated onto adult content. So what is that adult content? What does that stage look like? It's very much often first Roblox, then Minecraft, then Fortnite. And Fortnite is really, shall we say, the gateway to adult shooters like Call of Duty. And again, whether you believe in this or not, Call of Duty is an M-rated shooter. They've never been able to prove any correlation between shooting games and actual violence. It's not uncommon for me to talk to 9-year-old boys who are playing Call of Duty. Next slide. The other thing that I think is really critical is that gaming is parent approved. So 77% think it's a good leisure time activity for their kids. So if you think about this gatekeeping, again, what we're seeing is that parents loosely fall into 3 categories. The parents that are, really try to be thoughtful about monitoring their kids' time, which is maybe you can play video games half an hour or an hour every day, and that's it. And that's, for the most part, the bulk of parents. And then what you're seeing on either side are the parents who are super, super strict, who are saying maybe on the weekends or not at all. And then the parents that just let their kids have free reign. But I think what you're seeing, again, is that there's not a lot of resistance, and I've been doing video game research for 20 years, is that parents intuitively recognize the value of video games. So the other thing that's happening is, parents recognize this value because they're often playing together. So what we're seeing, next slide, is that these gaming parents are influencers. And so gaming parents often introduce their kids to video games, as I mentioned, first starting with Nintendo, because that's often the IP that they grew up with. And it's also very, very family friendly. So if we go to the next slide, here's some quotes from our study. My child's favorite game is PUBG. He loved it because of my love for it and my enjoyment of playing for it. And so for anyone who's not familiar, PUBG is what they call a battle royale shooter game. It's basically a mess of people fighting against each other until, one comes up on top. Next quote, my son loves Fortnite because he can play with me and his dad, and we have fun playing it together. So there's a lot of family play going on. The Sims, which is a title that skews female, it's a really creative title where you can build your own home and build stories with characters. Sims, because that's what I grew up on. It's important to recognize that a lot of the video game franchises that are out there, whether it's ones that I've already talked about, like The Sims or Call of Duty, all the Nintendo titles, Mario, Super Mario, have been around for at least 15, 20 years. So this is why a lot of these titles are really not only entrenched in parents' love because they played them as kids, but they're still popular to kids because they're fun, they're well made. So it's a really intriguing phenomenon that's happening here. And this is the first time that this has happened. You think about Gen X didn't have gaming parents. So just to tell you just a brief segue into gaming, again, there's 20 different types of games. Action adventure, so games like Among Us, console story-based titles like The Last of Us, which I talked about, the Spider-Man series of games that are on console. Those are kind of the most popular types of games, and that's because there's a lot you can do in them. You can explore, you can shoot, you can fight, you can collect. Shooters and fighting and wrestling games on computer and console are most popular, and then it goes from there. You'll sometimes hear the term sandbox, and that's titles like Roblox and Minecraft, where they allow kids to, basically have a virtual sandbox and build what they want. So around parent gamers, puzzle is the most popular type of mobile game. And as I mentioned before, kids are also playing these types of fun, easy mobile games. The motivation for playing mobile games is actually more to kill time. They're more simple, short session games. So there's also, because I don't want to say they're dumbed down, but because they're easier to play, because there is a lack of major controllers on mobile phones, kids are pretty much playing the same types of mobile games that their parents are. And it was so interesting in doing this research. There was an anecdote where a mom said, my daughter really likes the matching in Candy Crush. So moving forward, speaking to the fact that parent gamers are playing the same types of games, what you're seeing is that more than half of all parent gamers are playing either Fortnite, Minecraft, or Roblox. And these are what we call tentpole titles. These are big, major titles, not unlike Call of Duty, not unlike Candy Crush on the mobile side, where you literally have hundreds of millions, if not billions of people playing these titles. These titles are not going away. The other thing that's very frustrating about this is that it makes IP creation more expensive and more difficult for any sort of content creators, because you really are not only trying to, as we know, with any sort of IP, get it into the greater consumer ecosystem, but also because in many cases, the game developers have, been working on the Call of Duty. There are two sets of Call of Duty developers, but they've been, building games for 20, 25 years. A game like, GTA, Grand Theft Auto, which, when it first was released, there was a lot of concern about the crime and the sex and so forth in there. It's an extraordinarily well-crafted game, which gives the player a lot to do in it. Next slide. Quite frankly, parents just enjoy sharing games with kids. 78% in our survey said that they like introducing their favorite video games to children. And they're often playing. So 63% say that they regularly play together in person with their kids, and 37% play online. And you might wonder about the disparity between in-person and online, and it really speaks to the choice of content. So if you're going to play a game like Call of Duty, you're probably going to be going online and playing it. All right, so what can gaming not do? And I think this is really critical to recognize. So if you think about next slide, Maslow's hierarchy, what gaming does and why it's an interactive medium is it fulfills some really unique needs, especially around things, if you go up the Maslow's hierarchy, around love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. So a couple of quotes here. He likes to go onto Minecraft most. It's a game where he can incorporate his imagination and creativity. Or she likes to play Fortnite with friends, talking to them during different things. And so what you're seeing is that in some cases, similar to what I was talking about is tween and teenage boys playing shooters to socialize, is that the games themselves are often sometimes the glue that bring friends together. And so it's not uncommon to say, oh, I just go into Roblox just to talk to my friends. Or I really just like playing in Fortnite because I like, buying the skins, or rather your parents are spending the money to buy the skins for your different characters. So, different character costumes and things like that. So if you think about learning styles in children, some children are auditory, some are tactical, some are, kinesthetic, is that in many ways, gaming fulfills a lot of these different learning styles and a lot of these motivations and needs. As I mentioned before, gaming IP, especially the Nintendo IP, is really evergreen. And so what you've seen now is a leveraging of that IP into other forms of media. So most notably, the Super Mario movie, which was one of the most highest grossing movies of all time, grossed $1.4 billion. Now, I want to caution people here because people often think, oh, every, gaming can actually, fuel a lot of additional movie and television development. And it's true, there have been, next slides, some really successful examples, The Last of Us being a really great example. But there have also been a slew of really horrible gaming-themed movies, series, cartoons. I think the key is that they really need to be well-crafted. Next. Now, what's also happening, as I alluded to before, is that a lot of gaming studios are recognizing the power of what we're calling evergreen content. So you think about the Marvel universe, you think about the DC universe, superheroes in general. I'm old enough to remember when people would be in the 90s, like, are people ever going to get tired of superhero movies? But quite frankly, they're not. And the other reason why superhero movies are so popular is because they have global appeal, because it's pretty easy, even if you don't understand English, to recognize and appreciate the exploits of Batman or Spider-Man, even without knowing the language. So what we're seeing is that a lot of studios, and that's why there's always like some, is Disney going to buy EA? Because there is some synergy there. What you're also seeing is that the synergy for licensed content goes both ways. So for example, 78% of gaming parents are interested in licensed gaming content. Next slide. All right, so lastly, the future. What does the future hold? I think Mr. Zuckerberg, next slide, would think that it's the metaverse, but it really is not. And there are really two key reasons for this. One is that the headsets for VR are super duper expensive, $500, $600. So think about that. Most parents are not going to want to have to buy one or two or three of those. The other thing is in speaking about the existing the existing platforms that are out there, most notably Roblox and Minecraft, they're good enough for kids. And so there's no need for them to build something out. And so what we're seeing, if you go to the last slide, this is a question that we asked in the survey about a variety of different types of games. The ones that like about 80% of all parent gamers are interested in either relate to a video game that's based on existing content, whether it's IP like TVs, movies, so forth, or a video game that you can play on multiple platforms, hence what we've seen before. So if we scroll all the way back up, sorry to make you scroll, just to the implications for children's media, hopefully we can get there. It's actually, I think, slide 6 in the presentation. What we're seeing is that while gaming is popular, kids' engagement with kids' media is really short-lived, as they often age out by age 10. And what we're seeing is that these long entrenched licensed IP, whether it's Nintendo or Marvel, really resonates with both parents and kids. And this is the evergreen content that has the most traction for brand extension. And that gaming fulfills many needs from kids, but not all. For example, gaming does a really horrible job with being silly and funny. And I think, quite frankly, YouTube and TikTok do a better job there. And then the new IP that you're going to be seeing in video games is more likely going to be coming from entrenched franchises than actually new original IP. And, you know, I think there's been a lot of talk about, you know, Amazon and Netflix and, you know, having to leverage that content. But again, I think the most successful titles are really going to be coming from those really, really robust universes. And then lastly, VR and the metaverse really hold limited appeal. So that's really, hopefully you've gained some insights about the world of gaming from that.
Thank you very much, Robin.
Yeah. Hey, Josh. Great to hear from you. You know what? Two things. So ownership of VR headsets remains in the single digits. And this is from a variety of surveys. And a lot of that has to do with not only the cost, which in many cases is upwards of $400, but also the limited amount of content that is on those headsets. Now, AR is really interesting because I'm sure some of you actually know about Pokemon Go. That was really popular. The developer of Pokemon Go, a company called Niantic, has really struggled. They had a Harry Potter themed game in AR that didn't do so well. They're doing actually a couple of other games that they canceled. I think they've got a Monster Hunter game right now with Capcom. So not a lot of traction unless it's very, very specific for a specific audience. But generally speaking, it's not a growth market.
Very interesting. I'm curious, Robin, where does the AAP or Pew Research stand these days on video games? I'd seen in years gone by they were very vocal. I haven't heard much lately.
Yeah, so you know what? They actually backtracked. So it used to be that they felt like it was like kids under 6 shouldn't spend more than an hour. And they got a lot of pushback from parents. And now they said that it needs to be just well managed. I will tell you, I didn't put this in the deck. 75% of all parents think that their kids should be on video games instead of social media. And I feel exactly the same way with my kids, is that there are more benefits to video games, an hour of kids being creative. I saw a question about user-generated content where they're creating their own games in Roblox, or they're creating different worlds in Minecraft or The Sims. Like, if you think about Minecraft as a digital version of Legos, there's really nothing wrong with it. It's actually quite good. The problem is when kids get addicted to gaming because there's something called an engagement loop, which is basically goes into that idea of Maslow's hierarchy, where you have, you know, you're getting feedback, you're doing well on this level, you're going to get a reward if you get to the next level, and so they don't want to quit. So that's my concern. I think that a lot of these user-generated content platforms like Roblox and like Minecraft are really great for kids because they're able to be creative and also be social. So I still believe like 1 hour or less. I don't let my kids on social media. So, and I don't let them play video games for more than, I let them have an hour of screen time a day. That's it. Your mileage may vary.
Sure, certainly. I see a couple more questions have come in, though our time is running short. Karen, are we able to post one of them?
Sure.
Okay, great.
You know, I think that, I hate to say this, I'm sorry, folks from Leapfrog, is I don't hear a lot about this in my groups with parents and kids. And I think part of the reason is because a lot of the educational value, especially for grade school kids, has already been introduced in school. So I think back, if you think about Leapfrog's heyday, where schools did not have a lot of technology, or they didn't have things like IXL or EPIC, you know, for math and learning, math and reading specifically, that there was a need to go out of school to supplement technology. But it's like a rarity for me to have talked to parents now, as opposed to 15 years ago, where everyone wanted to get a, you know, a Leap pad for their kids so that they knew their ABCs before they went off to kindergarten. I'm sorry.
It is interesting. Over the time, ESA used to, you know, the gaming oversight board used to release reports, and there used to be a kids category, there used to be an education category, and you don't see them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tough market. And I think also the inroads that Google has tried to make in terms of educational learning. I think that it's almost a B2B model where the school is now, you know, the customer, not the parents.
Wonderful. Well, I think we may need to wrap right now. Robin, thank you so much for your presentation and the insights that we have all gained from it. I'd like to thank all our members who support CMA, and again, remind you, if you're not a member, to consider joining CMA, and if you're tech forward, consider joining CMA Bay Area. With that said, thank you all. I wish you all the best, all the success you seek in making amazing, engaging, wonderful products for kids. Be well, everyone.